Karen Jameson stepped into the luxury private jet terminal, her presence as deliberate as the designer handbag swinging from her wrist. The air smelled of fresh espresso and expensive cologne, a familiar scent that reassured her she was exactly where she belonged. She pulled out her phone, quickly scrolling through messages, barely glancing at the other travelers in the lounge. It wasn't until a movement near the runway caught her eye that she finally looked up. A man, tall, well-dressed, and entirely too comfortable, was making his way toward one of the private jets. Karen's gaze sharpened. Something about him seemed out of place. He wasn't looking around with awe, wasn't hesitating like someone sneaking into an area where they shouldn't be. Instead, he walked with purpose, his polished shoes clicking against the tarmac as if he did this every day. Karen's lips pursed. Who was he? And what was he doing near those jets? She glanced toward the concierge, who was busy helping another guest. Annoyed, she decided to handle this herself. With quick, decisive steps, she marched toward the man, her heels striking the floor with authority. "Excuse me," she said sharply, stepping into his path before he could reach the aircraft. "Where exactly do you think you're going?" The man, Leon Whitmore, stopped, raising an eyebrow as if surprised by the hostility in her tone. "I'm heading to my jet," he said simply. Karen let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Your jet?" She tilted her head, eyeing him like he had just claimed to be the president. "That's funny. Because this is a private terminal." Leon nodded. "I'm aware." Karen crossed her arms. "Then you must also be aware that only private jet owners are allowed in this area." "I know." His expression remained neutral, but Karen wasn't satisfied. "Listen, I don't know how you got in here, but this is restricted access." She gestured vaguely toward the terminal staff. "Maybe one of them can help you find the right exit." Leon sighed. He had encountered people like her before, entitled, presumptuous, and unwilling to accept the possibility that a black man could move in their world as an equal. He could have explained himself right then, but something told him it wouldn't matter. "I'm exactly where I need to be," he said. Karen scoffed. "Oh really?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice but keeping her tone sharp. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to back away from that plane before security removes you." Leon exhaled slowly, his patience wearing thin. "Ma'am, I..." But before he could finish, Karen had already pulled out her phone, her manicured fingers tapping at the screen. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "If no one else is going to do something about this, then I will." With that, she pressed 911. Karen's voice rang sharp and urgent through the terminal as she spoke into her phone. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious individual at the private jet terminal." She turned slightly away from Leon, making sure her voice carried just enough for nearby passengers to hear. "There's a man here trying to access a private jet that does not belong to him. I don't know what he's planning, but he's refusing to leave." A murmur spread through the lounge. A few heads turned, some passengers lowering their sunglasses, others subtly angling themselves to get a better look at the situation. Leon exhaled through his nose, keeping his composure. He had dealt with situations like this before, but it never got any less infuriating. He could already see where this was going. The assumptions. The immediate need to escalate. The complete lack of logic. Karen, satisfied that she had done her civic duty, placed a hand on her hip. "You're making this way more difficult than it needs to be," she said, eyes narrowing at him. Leon met her gaze. "Am I?" Her eyes flicked to the concierge desk, as if expecting someone to rush in and back her up. When no one did, she huffed. "Look, I don't want any trouble. But I know everyone who flies out of here, and I've never seen you before." "That's interesting," Leon mused, his voice measured. "Because I don't recall needing your approval to board my own jet." Karen laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Right. Your jet." "Sure. She gestured vaguely toward the aircraft. So, what? You're telling me you own that? Leon remained silent for a moment, tilting his head slightly. He could have told her the truth right then. Could have shut down her entire performance with a single sentence. But he was curious. Just how far was she willing to go? Karen, mistaking his silence for hesitation, smirked. That's what I thought. You should probably start walking toward the exit before this gets really embarrassing for you. Leon let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. Embarrassing for me? He glanced around, noticing the growing audience. The longer this dragged on, the more people stopped to watch. Good. Karen, emboldened by the lack of immediate consequences, crossed her arms. You should have just admitted you didn't belong here. I mean, really, what were you hoping to accomplish? Leon's expression didn't change. But his patience had reached its limit. He pulled out his phone, tapped a few buttons, and lifted it to his ear. Hey, it's Leon, he said smoothly, ignoring Karen's stunned expression. Yeah, I'm at the terminal now. Looks like I'll be a little late boarding. Apparently, someone thinks I don't own my own jet. Karen's smirk faltered. Leon kept his eyes on her as he continued. Yeah, go ahead and have security meet us here. I want to make sure there are no misunderstandings. Karen's face drained of color. Leon slid his phone back into his pocket and folded his arms. Now, he said, his voice dangerously calm. Would you like to try this again? The air in the terminal felt heavy with tension as two uniformed security officers approached. Their eyes flicked between Karen, whose arms were still crossed in smug confidence, and Leon, who stood tall and composed. A third man, a high-ranking airport official, evident by the gold stripes on his blazer, strode toward them with an air of authority. Karen immediately took the opportunity to play the victim. She turned toward the officers, gesturing wildly in Leon's direction. Thank God you're here, she exclaimed. This man has been loitering around the private jets, and when I asked him to leave, he refused. He's obviously somewhere he shouldn't be. The officers exchanged an unreadable glance before one of them spoke. Sir, do you have authorization to be here? Leon sighed, finally ready to put an end to the spectacle. He reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a sleek black leather wallet. With a flick of his wrist, he pulled out an ID badge and handed it over. I do more than have authorization, he said smoothly. I own the jet. The officer inspected the badge, his brow raising slightly as he scanned the credentials. The second officer leaned over to look, his expression shifting from professional neutrality to subtle surprise. Karen, growing impatient, tapped her foot. Well, she demanded. What does it say? The officer turned the badge toward her, giving her a full view of the name and title embossed in silver lettering. Leon Whitmore, CEO and founder, Whitmore Aerospace. Karen's mouth went dry. Her eyes flickered between the badge and Leon's face, as if her brain refused to process the reality of the situation. Leon let the silence hang for a moment, letting it sink in. Then, in the same calm voice that had unnerved her from the beginning, he spoke again. You see, Ms. Jameson, he said, tilting his head slightly, not only is that jet mine, but so is the company that builds them. A gasp rippled through the growing crowd of onlookers. Even the concierge, who had been quietly observing the exchange from behind the counter, widened her eyes in shock. Karen's posture stiffened. That can't be right, she stammered. The airport official cleared his throat, stepping forward. Mr. Whitmore, I apologize for this misunderstanding, he said, his tone suddenly much more respectful. Would you like us to handle this situation? Leon kept his eyes on Karen, watching as the last traces of her confidence crumbled. That depends, he said. I'd like to hear what she has to say first. Karen's lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time that day, she was completely, utterly speechless. Karen's silence didn't last long. She let out an awkward chuckle, the sound unnatural and forced. "Oh," she said, waving a hand dismissively, though the movement was stiff. "This was all just a big misunderstanding." Leon raised an eyebrow. "Was it?" "Of course," she said quickly, laughing again. "I was just joking. You know, having a little fun." She clapped her hands together, as if trying to reset the entire conversation. "I mean, come on, I didn't really think you were trespassing." Leon's face remained impassive. He had seen plenty of people scramble to save face before, but Karen's performance was particularly unconvincing. The onlookers weren't buying it either. A few murmurs of disbelief rippled through the lounge, and a man near the bar let out an audible scoff. Karen's smile faltered as she realized the damage had already been done. Still, she pressed on. "You have to understand," she continued, her voice adopting a faux friendly tone. "When I see someone I don't recognize near the jets, I just get concerned. You know how it is." She forced out another chuckle. "But obviously, you belong here. No hard feelings, right?" She extended a hand toward Leon, her fingers trembling slightly. Leon didn't move. Instead, he let his gaze drop to her outstretched hand, then slowly lifted his eyes back to her face. The weight of his stare alone was enough to make her retract her hand awkwardly, wiping it on the side of her blazer as if that had been her plan all along. The airport official cleared his throat. "Ms. Jameson, regardless of intent, your actions have consequences." Karen's head snapped toward him. "Consequences," she repeated, as if the very idea was absurd. One of the security officers nodded. "Given the nature of this situation, we're going to have to report this incident to the private jet chartering companies we work with." Karen's expression twisted in horror. "You, what? You can't do that." "It's already being done," the officer said simply. "Your name will be flagged for discriminatory behavior and harassment of a private jet owner. Effective immediately, you will no longer be allowed to book flights with any of our affiliated airlines." Karen's face drained of color. "You're banning me from private jets?" Leon finally spoke. "Not all private jets," he said casually. "Just the ones that are worth flying on." A few people in the lounge let out quiet chuckles. Karen, now visibly shaking, looked around, desperate for someone to come to her defense. But the faces around her held only amusement, disapproval, or outright indifference. She was alone. "No, this isn't fair," she stammered. I can't fly commercial. Do you have any idea who I am?" Leon gave her a slow, knowing smile. "Oh, I do." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, the security officer gestured toward the exit. "Ms. Jameson, please come with us." Karen turned back to Leon one last time, her expression pleading. "Mr. Whitmore, Leon, please, tell them this was all a mistake." Leon simply adjusted his cufflinks and glanced at his watch. "I have a flight to catch," he said. And with that, he turned and walked toward his jet. Karen, meanwhile, was escorted out of the terminal, her name permanently attached to the very thing she feared most, public humiliation. The lesson was clear: some doors, once closed, never open again. Karen Jameson's face was a mask of disbelief as the finality of the decision set in. Banned. Not just from this terminal, not just from this airline, but from flying with any private jet company affiliated with Whitmore Aerospace. "This is outrageous," she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "I'll have your jobs for this. I'll sue the entire airport." But the security officers weren't interested in her tantrum. They remained professional but firm, guiding her toward the exit with quiet authority. Karen's heels scraped against the polished floor as she resisted, looking around frantically for support. The other passengers, however, had already lost interest. The scandalous scene had played out, and there was nothing left to watch. Some checked their phones, amused by what had just unfolded, while others resumed sipping champagne, waiting for their own flights. For the first time in her life, Karen was insignificant. "Someone needs to do something," she pleaded, directing her gaze at the airport official, who simply shook his head. "There's nothing more to be done, Ms. Jameson," he said. "This decision is final." Leon, meanwhile, remained composed, his confidence unshaken. He had nothing to prove, not to her, not to anyone in this room. With a slight nod to the security team, he turned on his heel and walked toward the tarmac, where his jet stood waiting. The pilot, having observed the commotion from the cockpit window, gave him a knowing look as he climbed the stairs. "Everything good, Mr. Whitmore?" Leon chuckled. "Better than good." As he settled into his seat, a flight attendant offered him a glass of sparkling water. He took a slow sip, glancing out the window just in time to see Karen being led out of the terminal, still sputtering in outrage. With a smooth hum, the engines roared to life. The jet taxied down the runway, and as it lifted into the sky, Leon leaned back, watching the city shrink below. Down there, Karen's world had crumbled. Up here, his only destination was success. By the time Leon's jet touched down in Los Angeles, the internet had already done what it did best, turned the entire incident into a viral spectacle. News outlets picked up the story almost instantly. Morning talk shows debated the incident, journalists dissected Karen's actions, and legal analysts discussed the implications of her behavior. But while Karen's name became synonymous with public humiliation, Leon saw an opportunity. That evening, he released a statement. "Today's incident wasn't just about me, it was about the assumptions people still make about success, privilege, and who belongs in certain spaces. The aviation industry, like many others, needs to reflect the diversity of the world we live in. I hope this moment sparks a conversation about the change we still need." His words resonated. Business leaders, celebrities, and even fellow CEOs applauded his grace under pressure. Invitations for interviews poured in, and rather than dwell on the incident, Leon used his platform to advocate for diversity in luxury travel. He announced new initiatives within Whitmore Aerospace, mentorship programs for young pilots from underrepresented backgrounds, scholarships for aspiring aeronautical engineers, and partnerships with organizations focused on minority inclusion in aviation. Karen, meanwhile, disappeared from public life. For weeks, she was the punchline of the internet's collective amusement. Then came the inevitable: she deleted her social media accounts. Rumors swirled that she had fled the country to avoid further embarrassment. Others speculated she was attempting damage control, hiring PR teams to salvage what was left of her reputation. But the damage was done. Leon, on the other hand, only continued to rise. As his jet soared above the clouds on his next business trip, he glanced out the window, the sky stretching endlessly before him. Some people spent their lives trying to hold others back. But real success, that was about lifting others up.